My name is Doris Jeanette Cruz Hunter. Two things happened in 1945 that were significant. On September the 2nd, it was officially the end of World War II, and October the 10th, I was born. I was born at Angel Hospital, and I was the youngest of 8 children. I am certain that my mother was through having babies. The next sister to me is 6 years older, and the next one is 9 years older, and then the oldest sister is 13 years older. So I'm sure that I was a surprise. Dr. Edgar Angel delivered me, and he told my father, who was Fred Edmund Cruz, that I was a breech baby and that I was not going to be born. And Daddy replied back to him and said, Ed, my mother was a midwife and she turned babies when they didn't want to be born. Maybe you can turn her. And he went back where my mother was trying to have me and turned me, and hooray, here I came. Bum, 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 ready or not. My mother was Effie Jewel Langston Cruz, and she was born in Gordon County, Georgia. Daddy's daddy was one of the first settlers that came into the Clay County area, and my daddy always said that the log cabin he was born in was flooded when the Chattooga Lake was built. So we don't have any preservation of the place where he was raised, and I'm sorry about that. And they lived in Clay County until they heard news. That was the Cruz family. They heard news that cotton was big in Georgia, and there was money to be made in the cotton business. So Grandpa Woodson Cruz picked the family up and took them to Gordon County, Georgia. And they fortunately moved right next door to the big Langston plantation where my mother lived. And here they were sort of like sharecroppers, and Daddy would come over and go rabbit hunting with all my mother's older brothers. And Grandpa Langston had peach orchards and a lot of cotton, and he was, at his time, a well-to-do man, but he loved fishing the most. And it was a story written of his fishing love in the Atlanta Journal that they figured he fished 61 miles of fish, not counting Sunday, in his life. If you put them all end to end, he fished that many fish. And so that's how that my daddy, that's how my daddy saw my mother. Daddy would go over and rabbit hunt with my mother's brothers. And he tells the tale, the whole time he was alive, that he was visiting, come up into the yard to visit, and Mother was walking across the yard carrying a bucket. She was 12 years old. And my daddy said that God spoke to him, to his mind, and said, Fred, there goes your wife. And he looked at her again and thought, really? She was just a little slip of a girl. The adventure with the cotton farming for the Cruz family didn't pan out. Their house caught on fire and burned the house down, and the boll weevil came and wiped out a lot of the cotton crop there in Gordon County, Georgia. So Daddy's family moved on to Chattanooga, to the big town. And Daddy went to work for the Thacker Cotton Mill Company. there in Chattanooga, and he bought a brand new model something car. And he would write back to Mother in Gordon County, Georgia, from Chattanooga, and he would say, now I'm coming back to Georgia to go rabbit hunting, but you're the little rabbit I'm going to hunt. Mother said, oh, that just embarrassed me so much. But by the time she was 19 and he was 23, he proposed marriage to her, and they were married in Chattanooga. And she had on a peach voile material dress that was imported from Atlanta, except Mother called it Atlanta. She had that Elizabethan ER. It was bananas and tomatoes and Atlanta and potatoes. So they settled in Chattanooga, and our family lived pretty big. Of course, the family started growing. My oldest brother Jack was born within a year, and the next brother within 2 years. And Mother had 4 sons, just bing, 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 right off the bat. And then the four daughters were starting. And Daddy traded jobs. He started driving the milk truck for Coons Dairy. And he found out that he had the art of selling. And he would come up to the door, knock on the door, and talk to the ladies of the house and tell them that they had the first pasteurized milk in that area. And he could honestly sell a bear a fur coat. It's told of him. And then on the side, he had a little mule named Kate, and she pulled the coal wagon. He went to the coal area, coal dumping, bought coal, and distributed it around. So he had an extra job to take care of this family that was coming along. And Mother had a refrigerator, an ice box. It truly was an ice box. The ice man came and kept the ice changed out. She had a horsehair sofa, and there's pictures of my older brothers with a little split rail fence around the house. It was quite a high lifestyle, and they still had the little car. They lived out close to a place called an amusement park called Lake Wimpesoka. And later on down the years, I was taken back to see Rock City and Ruby Falls, and the amusement park was still there. And in this house with my family, I was not born yet, of course, was Grandpa Cruz. And that, of course, was my father's father. And he was a musician. He played his fiddle all the time. He was an entertainer. And he kept telling Daddy, which was Fred, we need to go back to the mountains. There's a fine living in those mountains. Though Grandpa and Aunt Ari was his wife, they were there in Chattanooga. They still felt the mountains calling them. Come back to the mountains. And he kept talking to him. Now I'm telling you, there's a good life, a good living here. You can have better food. You can grow your crops. You'll have beef cow and hogs and chickens that you can't have here in the town. And at that time, the Depression, the Great Depression, was beginning to creep into Chattanooga. And I think Daddy lost his job at Coons Dairy. They may have lost the whole business. So Daddy loaded up in a truck and with Grandpa and the children that were born at that time, and they headed to Rainbow Springs, right here in Macon County. And they ended up coming in as the Ritter Lumber Company was blowing its last whistle. And there was a train that hauled the loads of wood. There was little tracks around that was you could still see for until a few years ago. And I remember seeing the old home place that we lived in, just a little mound with a house on top of it. And we were always told, now that's where we lived when we first came to Rainbow Springs. And there was big bottoms all around the fields, and we had lots of gardens. My oldest brother Jack said he just cut wood year round. He didn't know that his name wasn't Go Get Wood till he was a teenager. And he and the other brothers were just busy all the time cutting wood. And the adventure being a farmer was profitable, and it wasn't. And I think my daddy, being an ambitious man, he wanted to have his own property. We were renting at that time. And I know that my sister Shirley, the one that is next to me in age, 6 years older than me, was born there, and Dr. Angel made a trip all the way out there the 5th of December to help her be born. And it is told that Daddy gave the hospital, Angel Hospital, 5 bushels of potatoes to pay for her being born. That was also during the time we had the 40-inch snow out there. And it was so deep that it froze the cow's udders, and Daddy rounded them up and put them under the porch to keep them from just freezing. It was just such a dire winter. Grandpa Cruz still sat on the porch and played his fiddle, and there was huckleberries patches up in the mountains. There was the wild blueberries, also strawberries in the spring, and it was kind of a dangerous life. My middle brother, Uncle Walker, told about the tale that Joanne, being she was the one 9 years older than me, she was a baby toddling around, and she was toddling right down to a big coiled up rattlesnake. And he called to her and spoke kindly to her, and she turned around and came back toward him. And he said, I saved Joanne's life. Many times that was his tale. There was a lot of interesting neighbors out there, the Parker family, and there was many funny stories Daddy told about the adventures with the family. One of them was that when they came from Chattanooga, they brought the Santa Claus suit. And Grandpa loved Christmas, and he dressed up as Santa Claus back in Chattanooga. So they decided they were going to let Grandpa dress up as Santa and go to the Parker families on Christmas Eve to their gathering. And Mother said that Grandpa went to great lengths to fix his beard nice and his hat, and he had his little sack, and they rounded up some hard candy, which was traditional. And when he came into the room, he knocked on the door. When he just poked his head around the door to come in, Miss Parker, Mother swears this happened, little Miss Parker, she jumped the wood stove, and she said, Lord God, he's not gonna get me. And she went flying out the door. We don't know how far she ran until she stopped running. So that did not work too good for the Santa Claus adventure. But then there was good times and adventures with the Parker boys. They were a gang unto themselves, and they were always laying wait in the gap for the Cruz boys to come by. And it was the Parker boys and the Cruz boys. They were always at war with each other. And of course they're grown up now and would give anything to see each other. But we lived there, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, and Daddy got news that there was a job driving the school bus from Rainbow Springs to Franklin. And people that knew of him said he had a bushel of cabbage, a big bag of cabbage or potatoes right there in the school bus, and when he stopped, he sold it along the way. And he also decided he was going to sell Blair products. And at that time, it was a good selling item. They had the wonderful flavorings, and the pie mixes were just coming in where you could put milk and the pudding mix and make pudding mix. And oh, it was a delicacy to have Blair products. And so Daddy ordered a Blair kit, and it was one of the great turning points of this whole family's life. There are turning points in families' lives, Betty. There are things that happen, and they change the dynamic of a family forever. And getting the Blair kit right there, the day he got that and looked at it and said, I'm going to sell this, he changed the dynamics of our family. And this is how he did it, what happened. So he came over with a school bus to the high school over here, and while school was going, he got out and went door to door selling his Blair products. And right here on this property that my house is on, and I have lived since 1975, there's a neighborhood that you have to come through to come up the hill up to the old home place where I was raised. And he climbed that hill. He crossed Crawford Branch right down here, Crawford Branch. He came up the hill, and as he looked around, he said, this is the most beautiful property I have ever seen. And he said he prayed and asked God, oh, I want to own this. Well, he didn't have any money at all. He had six children by that time, maybe 7. He had 7. And Betty, I take that back. We had moved from Rainbow Springs out to the old home place there at Mark Daddle. I'd forgotten that move. At some point in there, we did move to the Mark Daddle place. But when he first saw this property, we were still in Rainbow Springs. And which is just right on 64 West. You go by Rainbow Springs to get there. So Daddy came up the hill. It was right at dinner time, and there was a family living in the old home place where I was raised called the Housers. It was Jed Hauser and his wife. They had a daughter, Jenny, and Jenny was bedfast. No one knew what was wrong with her, but she stayed most of her whole life in bed. And they were so kind, so wonderful people. And they said, Mr. Cruz, we not only want to buy some Blair products, but we want to invite you to come and eat lunch with us. And oh, Daddy said it was just the finest thing. My daddy loved a big spread of food. He was a hospitable man on steroids. He would invite people, oh, y'all come on in, and we hardly had enough food for ourselves. And Mama would look over him, don't do that. And they would make the food go somehow. And so he came in and he talked to them and made friends. And he said, and when he was leaving, he said, I've got to go back and drive the school bus back. But he said, I want you to promise that if you ever want to sell this property, you'll give me the first chance. And they said, oh, Mr. Cruz, we'll never sell this property. We've lived here forever, and Jenny loves it here, and we won't never sell this property. And that was several years later. Daddy went to work on the CC program at Fontana Dam. He left out on foot, going to somewhere in Tennessee where he was going to sign up and go to work building Fontana Dam. And he said that there was a crew of people that went in and moved the graves. I had never known of this. He said they moved the graves, and they had to be willing to go into isolation for 2 years in case they had picked up a disease in doing that, and they would be safe to come back into society. He knew of that. He helped drive a truck, and he helped with the cutting of the trees and the preparing of the dam shores for the water to come in. I believe there was a camp that they stayed in of a night. He didn't come back and forth. He stayed over there for a certain amount of time. And some lady told me that she worked in that cafeteria where he would come and eat, and knew my daddy, which pleased me very much. It was so interesting to me, Betty, because my daddy helped build Fontana Dam. When the lake came in, the wood that you see in my crafts, it all came off of Lake Fontana. Would he not be amazed if he could see down from heaven and see me out there going through the lake shores to find these amazing pieces of wood, and that he had helped build? But he saved the money, saved his money, and out on our south side here, we had neighbors, the Hogsets, who were lifelong friends to us. Mr. Hogset worked on Fontana with Daddy, and they were friends. And one day Mr. Hogset came in. His name was George. His wife's name was Maud. And the longest my mother knew her, I never heard her call her anything but Miss Hogset. And she was Miss Cruz. That was the generation they were from. But Mr. Hogset said, the neighbors have sent word for you to come. They're going to sell you the house and the property. The Housers are ready to sell the property. And so Daddy had the money saved in the bank, and he went right straight and bought the house. Now, Mother was, by this time, she had snuggled out in the old Mark Daddle home place. And that was a story and a time all unto itself. And she did not want to move to town. She didn't feel like that all of a sudden she was up to being a town lady, because it was different. And she said that she started having dreams about growing carrots. And my mother was a gardener. There's just no other way around it. She was a born gardener. And she had dreams night after night of just banks of these wonderful carrots. And she said that just began to sink in her spirit and her mind, and she thought, I want to grow carrots. I bet I can in that garden. There was a large garden space here. And she said by the time we got moved down there, we never did grow carrots. But she said it was the best place for us to be. And Daddy bought all of this 8 acres of land in 1944. This 2 acres where my house is actually was not part of the original property. It belonged to Mr. Cabe, who lived over here on the road on 441 Business. And we moved in. I was still not born. And my 4 brothers had been called into the war. But it was about to wind down. The oldest brother, Jack, went into Okinawa, and he brought home a real silk Japanese flag and a wooden chest that had Japanese writing on it. He also brought home the first set of bubble lights that I had ever seen, which just set me in orbit with joy. The Uncle Floyd, the second born, went into Germany, and he was part of the occupation whenever the Germans were defeated, and he went in with the first group. and he saw the piles, the ashes, the mountains of ashes that were still smoldering from the murdering of the Jews. And it was a great, amazing thing for him, adventure. The youngest brother, Dwayne, was in the Marines, and he was on Okinawa. But the war was about to end by the time that they went in. When I was born in 1945, it was 2 years before they saw me. So I was a toddler by the time that they saw me. And it was rumored that they carried me around on a pillow because I was a surprise. The other sister was 6 years old. She was past carrying on a pillow. But that's what they told, that they were so amazed over this new baby. I started the first grade, and I believe that I started a year late. Miss Franks, Elsie Franks, was my first grade teacher, and she lived just right up the way. All of a sudden, I was in a class of people, the merchants, the people who had stores. Their kids went to Franklin School. And here, I was the youngest of 8 children, and I claimed that I didn't have a new dress until I was in high school, but I had a lot of hand-me-downs. And somehow my family, by the time that I was born, the Van Ralt meal was about to come into play, and the 2 oldest brothers went to work at Van Ralt, and Uncle Floyd, the second oldest, managed to get a new Chevrolet car. And he would come and get me at school in that new Chevrolet car. And the kids thought he was my daddy. And they would say, "Here comes your daddy to get you, Doris." But it was actually my brother. And by this time, my daddy, I was the late born, and I remember seeing gray hairs in my daddy's beard, and it made me sad. I felt like something wasn't right, that he was old. Mother was about 40-ish whenever I was born. So I was totally the surprise child. We had, or I had an opportunity to be friends with Francis Duncan. The Duncans had one of the first televisions in this town. They had in their backyard a big long antenna that went miles up into the sky, it looked like to me. And I remember it sat on the floor, and it had a lot of fuzz. I didn't remember seeing too much. But that's where I took my first drink of Coca-Cola, was at her house in a beautiful, she opened the cabinet, and it was just full of sparkling glasses. And I just thought it was heaven. And I thought, someday I'm going to have sparkly glasses like that. And she had ice in the refrigerator, and put that Coca-Cola in the ice, and I was expecting just a wonderful thing, but I burped it up and it came up in my nose, and I didn't like it. I decided that Coca-Cola was not for me, and I still don't drink it to this day. Another outstanding family that I remember was the Burrell family, and they also had a big antenna going way up to pick up the first television programs. Howdy Doody and Claire Bell, the clown. I just thought it was just amazing to get to go to their house and see Howdy Doody. It was the first television. I remember finally we got a small one in our house, and an outstanding memory, not of the television, but I remember Mother had access to the grocery. There was the home store was the Winn-Dixie, and it was right where Linda McKay's NC Mountain Maid Shop is now. It took up two spaces in there, and Mother would get bought cookies, and I remember there was some vanilla cream. A pack of vanilla cream sandwich cookies, and I sneaked them over behind the couch, and I ate a lot of them. instead of eating my dinner, I ate a lot of those cookies, and I was very sick. I can not eat them right now or see them and be sick, but everybody was watching the television and I was sneaking the cookies. It was kind of lonely because my sister was already in school by the time I was born. And so I looked around the neighborhood, and on the east side of our house property was a place we call Sprinkleville, because there was just a lot of Sprinkle family, and the Talents, it looked like they were some of the first families or their offspring to settle over in this area. I also remember the Gladwells. That would be Virginia and Max's family. And they pulled a truck, helped them pull their house in, a whole already built house. They pulled it in and sat it down over there in the field and then built around it, planted trees around it. And it was the neatest. There wasn't a crumb out of place in that house. I just thought it had to been heaven. And Betty Jo and I struck up to be friends. She was the daughter of Henry and Dora Talent. She was the youngest of her family also. And I would slip down the hill, and we would make forts, and we would dam up the little Crawford Branch, we know it now. And it was just a wonderful place of crawdads and salamanders, and we weren't afraid of them. We should have probably been, but we weren't. And we had a little bridge over the creek. It was just a mysterious place, and always running. It's still running today. It goes down by the little park there in Franklin. And one of my fondest memories was the generosity of Betty Jo's mother. She appreciated me playing with Betty, so she tried to have little treats. And one of the things that she was generous with was sharing her chocolate layer cake. To this day, I have never tasted a more wonderful feast in my whole life is Miss Talent's cake. And we would peep out the back porch, and there it was sitting in the middle of the table, ready for a piece. We just knew for maybe dessert. And she would pack us up a little picnic. It was always peanut butter and jelly, blackberry jelly, homemade blackberry jelly. And she would say, now y'all go over and have a picnic. And when we would have our picnic bag open, there was a piece of chocolate cake, big enough for two of us, but we each one got a big slice. So we enjoyed our picnics. And then in the hottest summer, remember, we did not get any ice cream from the store. That was something that was just coming in. It was just making its way in. Everybody, if they wanted ice cream, they made it with a wooden churn that turned by hand. And my family had one till it was falling apart. And Daddy would go out to the roller mill bridge to the ice place and get a big chunk of ice. And that's how we had an ice cold watermelon. I remember, Betty, when we didn't have electricity. I remember, but now I was very young, but we got electricity when I was just a few years old. And there was a water line that went up the road, but we had to trench a ditch in to bring in water to the whole home place. And so we had a well out there for a long time, and we would put the bucket down and bring it up, and there was our water, and heat it on the stove. And Mother had a big old wash pot out in the back that on Monday morning, the smoke coming in from that wash pot to heat the water would wake me up. And she had Black Luler and Louise, and they were people in the neighborhood, and they would come and help her with the wash. And that my brother had brought her back a Maytag wash machine that you put the clothes in the bottom of it, and then it had the ringers that she would put the sheets through the ringers. And so anyway, back down to Betty Jo, we never had bought ice cream. And I remember it was either 5 cents or 10 cents that she gave us to go up to the store, which was over on 441 Business, to buy an ice cream in the middle of the day, right in the middle of the day. And so we carefully put our money in our pocket. And I said, Betty Jo, now I'm going to show you the way up. There's a shortcut. And what I didn't tell her was it had to go right straight through Miss Bates's yard. Under Miss Bates's porch, we had heard there was a watchdog. And if you went through the yard, if you were real quiet, you'd get by safely. But if he heard you, oh, it was awful. We didn't know what, but I said, come on, we can go through. And we're about to tell about the watchdog, but I wanted to talk about that neighborhood a little bit. It left a great impression on me, Betty. Sometimes we don't think about our neighbors making an impression on us, but I wanted to read this little story that, going back in time, was easier for me to write than it was for me to tell. Our neighborhood had interesting people in each house. We call the area east of our property Sprinkleville, named for several families who settled there first. There was the Hoffman boy, who had a room full of comic books. The Barnes cultivated chickens, and still do to this day. They wake us up every morning, the Barnes chickens do. The Long sisters were older than most of my sisters and had a weeping willow tree in the front yard that was lovely in the spring. That's what I always remember about these people. The closest family down the hill from my house was the Henry Talent clan. They had a daughter close to my age named Betty Jo. Mr. Talent kept his yard perfectly groomed, and he drove the town of Franklin garbage truck. He brought it home each night. Betty Jo and I could hear him rattling around the curve right after 5 o'clock. She and I would wait at the top of the road and catch a ride, hanging on to the side holes all the way to their house. The truck itself was a moving treasure trove. All kinds of interesting things made it home to Betty Jo. I got to enjoy them too. There were metal tea sets that we made our dolls a party every day, and castaways that we folded into our play days. One was a rusty cash register that the drawer would still pop open. We had paper money, but I knew someday I would have real cash, somehow, in some way. That cash register really impressed me. Other finds were bicycles on their last leg, wagons with 3 wheels, and kid furniture. Betty Jo's mother made a memorable chocolate layer cake, and this is what I've already told you about, the picnic that we had, and then how generous she was to give us money to go to the store and buy a popsicle with. The neighborhood store was Cheryl's store, owned by Jack Cheryl. It was where the tattoo parlor is now, right on 441 Business and McCoy Meat Market before that. The store was in a brick building that had wood floors sprinkled with some sort of sawdust stuff, and there were big glass jars of crackers and candy around. There were probably canned goods and bread, but I only remember my favorite fudgesicles. There was no easy way to get up to the store. The shortest route was straight up the hill, right through Miss Bates's yard. It was a run-down yard and a run-down house. She had a son, Jess, who we all heard was loud when he was drinking, and no one stopped there. She did not have a screen on her door, and you could look right into her living room. I felt sorry that the furniture looked old. I was leading the way up to the store, so I grabbed Betty Jo's arm and practically dragged her as fast as I could to get by the house. We were halfway through the yard to safety when suddenly a creature from hell itself heard us. It came snarling, barking, tearing out from under the porch, teeth bared and ready to devour us. About the time it was all over for me and Betty Jo, the chain it was tied to caught, stopped, and jerked it off its feet. Miss Bates, an elderly sweet woman, came toddling out and assured us, "He won't hurt a thing. Go on by." The yellow beast crawled back under the black hole under her porch floor. Not even the devil's dog could stop us from going on to get that ice cream treat. I pulled Betty Jo with me as we hurried up the hill. The path was grown up with beggar lice, cockleburs, and blackberry briars. It faded into a steep bank that rain had washed ruts through, but it was worth the pain to get there. When we got to the store, we opened the freezer door, and out whooshed freezing air. We got to have our pick. What a treat on a scorching day to lick that big fudge sickle. It almost froze our tongues, and we had to eat it quickly before it melted. As the last drop went down, we thought, uh-oh, the trip back home ran right through Miss Bates's yard again. What a happy memory and a scary memory. When I went to elementary school, at that time there was the elementary school up on the hill from Franklin High School. And then there was a great big gymnasium. And I remember my family waking me up one night and saying, "The gym's burning down. Let's go look." And we jumped into the car and ran over, and it was going up in smoke. The whole thing burnt down in a night. And we were just all dismayed because that's where we went to have the Halloween carnival. And I remember going in there and playing go fishing, putting your fishing pole over the sheets that were everywhere, and hoping you would get a prize. And we did get a prize. And we played bobbing for apples. It was a great fun, the fall festival, but I thought that the building looked very old and dilapidated. And I remember in the cafeteria of the high school that's still there, looking up, and they had a big ball and chain, and they came and were breaking down the left brick walls. And it was sad to see the gymnasium gone. But in its place came the newer buildings for Franklin High School. And that was where I graduated in 1963. I received the Art Award. I received the vote of the most talented in my class. And I was 1 year younger than everybody in my class because though I went to school, later in the third grade, the teacher put me on up out of the third grade into the fourth grade. So I was still made it out on time, graduated a little bit earlier than the rest of my friends. I think I outgrew the seats. I've always been tall, and I'm sure that that's what happened. In 1963, I married Thomas Russell Hunter, and the years following that, we had 3 of the most wonderful children that has ever been on the earth. You know, every crow thinks his is the blackest. By that time in my life, my father passed away in 1961 very suddenly, and I was trying to take care of my new little family and help my mother. She was very devastated. When Daddy left, she just kind of went to bed, and all of the things that she loved to do. Her mother was a quilter. She was a gardener. She had one of the first tomato patches and sold them commercially that I knew of in this county. We had 2 hotbeds down below the house on the slope, and I would go into the woods to help her push big bags of topsoil from the wood soil, and then we would get the dirt out of the around the barn. Daddy always had a barn, and she grew shumway tomato plants, and I would help her dig the holes. We put down a big old tin can, pounded it down beside each plant, and she would water the tomatoes by pouring water in the tin can. And her goal was always to have tomatoes by the 4th of July. And whenever, even before I went to school, I helped her can hundreds of jars of beans, tomatoes, soup mix, peaches. We made applesauce, dried fruit, dried apples.
Tell me how to dry apples right quick.
You just peel them, Betty, and the weather at the end of August, when the apples start coming in, is perfect. And Mother sometimes would put them in one of the cars and shut the door. You don't want the bees to just eat it up if you can help it. And she just put them on, instead of throwing away screen doors, she would put them, the apples, on cloths and just dry them. And you want to keep them in a pillowcase. And when we were advanced enough to have a freezer, she would, or you could just hang them up, but she kept them frozen. And then there is nothing more wonderful than a homemade dried apple pie in the winter. That is customary in our family. We make, if we see it snows coming, we make the dried apple pies, the little flip overs with the homemade crust, and make a big pot of soup. It's customary. You can't have a snow without having dried apple pies. In 1975, another convergence happened for me, and that was the introduction of pine cone birds. It was January. Nothing was going on for sure. All my children were in school. By this time we had 3. That was my family, a girl and 2 boys. Dan was in kindergarten. And Margaret Ramsey called me up and said, "Doris, would you come over to my office and look at these pinecone birds that I have brought home?" Betty Warsler and I have been to a little school at the Airmont in Gatlinburg. And there is a lady, Miss Dorothy Tresner, who makes pinecone birds for the Southern Highland Guild. And she gave a little workshop, and we've learned how to make pinecone birds. And we were thinking, coming home, who could we teach this craft? She said it needs to be a person. It was sort of like part of the Johnson Operation Bootstrap, when he was determined the war on poverty, seemed like it was in those years. And she said, just come by and look at them. And I remember the little turkeys that we made in the first grade with a cupcake liner tail, and it had a pipe cleaner wattle. That's the first thing that came in my mind, and I thought, I don't know if I want to do that or not. But I liked Margaret, and I decided that I would go by her office. And she had 5 little birds right there on her desk: a quail, a cardinal, there was an owl, a little Carolina wren, and maybe a robin. And the little wren caught my attention. They were quite primitive and not very attractive, but the little wren, and to this day it is my favorite bird to make. The little wren was just charming to me. And I thought, I might try that. In the crush and the run of raising 3 little children, I had to put my art love and my craft love aside. I was so busy from morning until night, and all night it seemed like, in those nurturing times, that I didn't have time to do anything else, because I was going to be the perfect mother if I could. And cook homemade bread. It was just against the law to have anything besides home-cooked meals and homemade bread. And I remember Miss Talent's chocolate cake. We had to have one of those. I wanted my family to grow up and be special and have clean. I ironed their blue jeans. That's what I did. And I ironed their pillowcases. And that's how I wanted to do it. It was the beginning of the greatest door opening in my life. And I used to hear Daddy talk about that the door of opportunity does not open many times in the mountains. We used to have a saying, what are you going to do for a living? Pick blackberries? There was not a lot going on here. The ruby mines came and had their heyday, and then the maple crafts was another heyday that came, and of course it has passed on now. But at that time it was just beginning. I think the Worslers and Margaret Ramsey had just started the maple crafts. So I became one of the members. I went to the little class the next day, getting back to the story about the bird, and it took me all morning to make a cardinal. And there it was. It looked like a red pig with a yellow snout for the world. And I was so proud of it, though. My husband came around and picked me up. We only had one vehicle at the time. And I said, look what I made. And I said, I want you to take me down to the shopping center, and I want a bird book. There was a little bookstore down there. And I was so excited, it was on my lap. And when I opened the door to get out, it fell out and I stepped on it. All my morning's work, I stepped on it and crushed it. And I was just it was just let down that I had done that. But I picked it back up and fluffed out the cone a little bit, and the next day I went to the class again, and when I redid it the second time, it looked better. And it just dawned on me, if I practice on this, I might get good. And my husband said to me, well, I'm going to predict that you'll sell 2, because I'll buy one and your mother will buy the other one. And you know, that didn't sit well with me. And I just thought, I'm going to show you something. And I started making them. I got some extra brushes and some new paint. I didn't have a lot of money to start out anything with. And the thing about the pinecone birds is they depend on skill. You take a very simple item, but your skill, the little wings are cotton bolls. That's throwaways from the cotton field. The tail is a piece of a pine cone, and the little wire feet are the only man-made thing on the whole bird. The head has to be sculpted, and the little wire is the armature, and when they dry, you can start your painting of them. And that takes great skill to make it believable. I found some little slices of wood and perched the little bird on it. They were $5 at Mako Crafts. The first bird were $5. Well, guess what? It was by this time, summer had come and the summer people were here, and they just liked little pinecone birds. And I figured out a way to make them on a mobile. And in July, when the height of the tourist trade was, I had a several $100 check. And I went to the drive-in bank and handed that to my husband for him to get it cashed. And he was just, oh, well, that's just really interesting. And the next thing I knew, he was out looking for mobile wood with me. He decided that was a good thing, that I might make some money at it. And here again, the door of opportunity was about to open upon me. And I loved it. I became just fascinated. I love birds anyway. And by just practicing over and over and over, they started looking better and better. And I would find little tricks, little tips that made them look better was a better presentation. And one day, a lady said to me, "Why don't you go to Fontana Dam and see if you can find some wood over there?" And I said, "I will do that." And so I talked to everybody, all my family, loaded them up in the car and said, "We're going to Fontana." And that started years of, I would rent a boat. I finally bought a little boat, and we would go over and it was the most fun day. Looking back on all the things I did in my life, going to the wood to find the driftwood was just so exciting. Some people call it beach combing, and they look for shells. Well, I just fell in love with the various kinds of wood. And the best time to go was in the fall when the lake started dropping down, and the sun had bleached the wood all summer. That was a good time to go. And it was just the highlight of my craft work. I really, really enjoyed it. I did leave out something that happened that was another important convergence, and that was in the 6th grade, whenever I was going down the hill with my class. I had been having pain in my left leg. I didn't know what it was, but it was beginning to get more hurtful, and I fell down. My leg collapsed on me. I just fell down, and I was hardly able to get home. I remember that, without holding on to something. My daddy took me to Dr. McSween. He was our chiropractor here in Franklin. And he made an x-ray, and he said to my daddy, he said, "I think she needs to go to Asheville to have a pin put in her leg," which was close to being true. That was the cure for what I know now. I had Perthes leg disease, and that is a very rare bone problem. The blood supply is cut off to the joint collapses, and you don't have a joint anymore. Eventually, you begin to repair it with rest, and that's what I did that summer. I stayed in bed almost all summer, and I went to school in the 7th grade starting on crutches. And another love was playing softball. I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't run anymore. I had become a Christian the year before that and been baptized in the Colsager River. My oldest brother, Jack, and Fred Sarles baptized me in the Colsager River. And so I knew about praying to God, and I began to pray to God. And I said, "I know you're going to help me. I've heard about you. I know that you are real, and I believe you will help me." And in a few more months, I began to be able to not have to use my crutches, but my leg was permanently damaged. The cure for this disease is the hip replacement. Well, there wasn't any hip replacements at that time. So in the process of the disease, by the time a person is in their mid-30s, they start developing degenerative arthritis, and that's what happened to me. We had moved into our house here that I'm in right now, and my sister next to me in age had moved to Atlanta, and she said, "I've got a doctor that will help you." And I went to Atlanta, and a surgeon down there said, "We can give you a hip replacement." I was 35 years old. The average age of people who have this as a child and have the arthritis is 37. So I hit it right at 35 years old, and I had my first hip replacement. And it was a long time getting over it. It just takes a long time to heal. But that gave me 30 more years of working, and I was able to go to the lake and do adventuresome things that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't have had the first hip replacement. In 2005, I had a revision of the the cushion part of it had to be revised. And then January of this year, the original prosthesis had to be taken out and a new one put in. And here I'm going 20 more years. And I look forward to being able to go back to the lake. In 2004, my oldest son, Michael, took me and a log rolled with me. And it's hazardous to get up on those brush piles. And my son said, "Get in the boat, Mother. We're going home. We're not going to do this anymore." So that ended the boat adventure and the wood hunting adventure. And in the meantime, I had joined the Southern Highland Guild. I became a heritage folk artist, and that was another convergence. It opened doors for me. In 2002, Barbara Bush was the first lady, and she decided that the theme for the big tree in the Blue Room was going to be Birds of the States. And she contacted probably the Art Council. And the Art Council looked for 5 artists from each state to make a bird for representing their state for the Christmas tree. Just 5 from each state, and I was one chosen. And there was several carvers that carved birds. It could only weigh so many ounces, and one of the carvers hollowed out his woodpecker so it would be light enough to pass the test. And I did not get to go see and meet the president and the first lady. I had a show in Tallahassee, Florida that I had to do. And it was one of the griefs of my heart that I did not get to go, because there was a reception just for the artists for that time. But my work is in the Smithsonian. I didn't get my arrangement back. And, there may be another time whenever I will get to go to the White House. I would love to do that. But that was another adventure. The biggest door of all had to have been, there was something good and there was something bad. In 1986, my marriage ended. It was it came suddenly, and I was left with the boys ready to get out of high school. My daughter was a sophomore at Western, and I was determined all my children were going to get an education. So it was a shocking time, a time of great need, and then it was a good time because the next year we started the first year of the Hard Candy Christmas Show. Up till this time, I always had a Christmas show at the Cobb County Civic Center in Marietta, Georgia, and I would load up and go down, and my sister Shirley would help me put the show up. And I had a tremendous show down there. And it was very stressful on me because I did not like to get out of my element here in Franklin. We got 2 red lights and one of them blinks. And to get down to where we had to drive on 285 for a long time, that was very distressing to me. I didn't enjoy having to do that. So I said to my cohort, Michael Rogers, whom everyone knows, his watercolors, I said, "Michael, let's have a little sale, a little Christmas sale for us." And he said, "Oh, okay." We rented the Slagle Memorial Building for $50. And we had Linda McKay. Linda was making baskets and little dolls. And we had Cowie Creek Pottery. We had Marty Wilson's Wood Toys. And Cindy Lightfoot was making her granny dolls. We had somebody who made some jewelry. I can't remember, one of Cindy's friends. And the Slagle Memorial was just big enough for that many people. We put a little small ad in the paper. We put a sign down outside on the road and hoped somebody would come. It was more overwhelming and more successful than we ever dreamed. We didn't have near enough people parking space for people. I sold the most at that show than I've ever sold at any other show, comparatively, since then. We were just amazed. We put a fire in the big rock fireplace there. I think we actually called it the Fireside Show, Arts and Crafts. And we found out that people were still here after the last leaf fell, and that they wanted nice hand-done work. So the second year rolled around, and Michael Rogers had forgotten to rent the Slagle Memorial Building, and there was an event in it. So now he was in the doghouse. And I said, let's find another place for the show. And Phil Drake was at the end of the lease there in the Callahan Building, where the Tartan Museum was for a time. And he said, you can just have it. I've got 3 or 4 more days on this lease, and you can just have it. Well, the people up front, or in the stores, they were not happy about us being in their neighborhood. They wouldn't speak to us. They wouldn't let us borrow their broom. They were just mad that we were going to put this event. And here again, we talked. The first year we had 8 people. The second year we had 18. We begged some more people to come in with us. And it was just overwhelmingly crowded, and people made good money. And I noticed at the end of the show, when we were taking everything down, that several of the people were in there over their lights, just counting their money, tallying it all up. They had a real good day too. It brought in other people, or it brought in customers for everybody. The third year, we were beginning to get some more. We had maybe 24 that year, and several people out of town had heard about the show, and they wanted to come. And Miss Farmer, bless her heart, Jean Farmer, brought in big palms, some of her decorations, fill-ins for weddings. And she said, Doris, I believe it was her mother-in-law, was sick that year, and she said, I can't come. I said, will you just bring us some of your cactus? I'll sell cactus. And I put on a red apron, and it was going to be the money for Jean Farmer in my pockets. And I sold cactus all day. We had to call the greenhouse to let them bring out more cactus. And it was so successful. I took that apron off and handed her that apron with all that money in it. And from the next year on, she was a regular at the Christmas show. And by the 4th year, the other artists decided they didn't want to get up at Thanksgiving table and go set up a show. They didn't want to do that. And I said, I'll take it over. I'll do it. I'll miss Thanksgiving. And I don't think I've had a Thanksgiving for the last 30 years. And the 4th year, it turned into the Hard Candy Christmas. I charged $1 admission, which was daring and shocking. And we had the whole gym full. That was 44 people in the Macon County Community Building gym is where we were. The 5th year, I rented out the whole building. And we were there about 15 years, I think. And in 2006, I moved the show to Colowee, to the Western Carolina University Ramsey Center. And it so happened that my daughter's best friend was Julie Spiro, the director of the chamber. And she had came over to the Christmas show with Regina. And she said, oh, if your mother will just bring this to Jackson County, we will buy her a bulletin board. We'll roll out the red carpet for her. And she did. And it was another important convergence, because looming in the future was the Great Depression starting in 2008. It was about to come on us, but we didn't know it. And it just took the steam, if you will, out of the craft show business for a lot of years. If I had not been in Colway, I would not have made it here in Franklin. There just isn't the people interested or happy to support arts and crafts here, like I needed to make the I call it the Great Depression. It was a depression. And this year we are going to be celebrating our 30th anniversary. It's almost full. We have some wonderful exhibitors. We have some new bears that are made by Miss Betty Kay that we're so excited over. And corn shuck angels. You cannot find them anywhere. And we will want everyone to come and enjoy our show and see what the crafts community is producing this year. And I think that's all that I really want to. Betty, I didn't talk about Christmas at our house, but we will another day. It influenced me and was really.
Let's do it right now. Tell us about Christmas in your home. Tears are okay.
Betty, it was the time in my life. Now, before I went to school, when I realized that Christmas was real and that God was real. I saw in the stars of the December night beauty and loveliness. It came down and touched me. I've never gotten over it. And I want the Christmas spirit to be at our show. That's what the Hard Candy Christmas is really about. It's about the people in the South and in Appalachia celebrated Christmas, no matter if they had a lot of toys, a lot of food. They took what they had and they shared it. And even if it was not much income coming in that year, we always got a stocking with an apple and an orange and a piece of hard candy. And as there became more money in to our family, Mother wanted to tell us about how that it was when she was growing up. And she had a fruitcake recipe that I would help her make it at Thanksgiving. And it had to set and steep in apricot nectar or apricot brandy, nectar brandy, before we could cut it. And then the week of Christmas, we had a real homemade coconut cake. And she would go to the grocery store and get a imported in coconut and poke a hole in it and drain out the juice. And sometimes the juice was bitter, but if it was sweet and good, we had got a good coconut. And then after the juice was gone, we heated it in the oven for 5 minutes or 15 minutes, 10 minutes, until it separated from the shell. And then you let it cool and then you crack it, and the shell would come off, and there was the heart of the coconut, but that brown coating has to be scraped off. And then she had a food meal. And I remember before we could ground the coconut, we had to put a potato in it so that if there was any residue in the food meal, it would come out. And when the potato started running white, it was ready to put the coconut in. And Betty, it took all day. The layers were homemade with real butter. And at one time, instead of just plain flour, we had cake flour. Oh, we were really living big then. And for a long time, we had our own black walnuts. And they were in the shale, and Mother would put them out in the road, and the cars would run over them, and the sun would dry them, and the shell would fall away from them. They needed to be cured before you cracked them. And there was a certain way you could hold them and crack them, and some of the shell would come off in big pieces. So a black walnut cake, the chocolate cake sprinkled with black walnut goodies was just divine. And then we took some of the black walnuts and put them over in the fruit cake. And Daddy always bought a big ham. And on Christmas morning, I'd wake up and smell that Christmas ham wafting through the house. It was just, I can't tell you, it was just a magical time. And we never had a bought Christmas tree. That was something that came in later in life. We had a cedar tree from on the side of the road, and our favorite place was the Angel family field over here. It was just briars and brambles, and my sister and I, we were the big Christmas Santas in the family, and we would spot the cedar tree early while it was still warm weather, and we'd lay our eyes on it, and that's going to be our Christmas tree. And we had an old hatchet that my older brother fixed up for us, and we'd have to go over, and the interesting thing always about the tree was that it was smaller in the field than after you cut it. And we had to drag it across Crawford Branch and up the hill, and the farther we dragged it home, the bigger the thing got. It's the truth. And my brother made a X for it to rest on. Then he would take the hacksaw and saw off the bottom of it and anchor it so we could bring it into the house. The most magic I ever remember was when we put the bubble lights from my brother, oldest brother Jack's trip. Somewhere in his travels, he found some bubble lights. And to this day, I've got a couple or three still like in a little night light that I put in the wall for Christmas. And you hardly can find them anymore. But it was just the most beautiful thing. And I learned how to cut out snowflakes and put on the windows. And Mother always made Daddy a surprise stack fruit cake, using here again the dried fruit, and that with our homemade fruit cake that was basting in the back somewhere in the cool bedroom where there wasn't any heat. And we tried to make little things for each other, little toys and little goodies. Fortunately, by the time that I came along, the stores in town, the Henderson's 5 and 10 cent store, was open, and Betty, to see all of that Christmas splendor, the dolls, the wagons, it was just breathtaking to me. And then Franklin started decorating their windows, and we started our lights. It's just one of the prettiest little towns at Christmas that I can ever remember. But the best story of all was our kitchen window in the old house up on the hill looked out to Dr. Furman Angel's tree line right there in his yard. He hired someone to go up in one of the big, tall jack pines, and there was millions of lights, it looked like to us. He had lights over the whole top of the tree, and I can't tell you who was brave enough to get up there and do it. But who in our family, whoever saw Dr. Furman turn the lights on was it. They were special for the Christmas holidays. And here we would be washing, there was just always piles of dishes for supper. And we would look up there, and there was Dr. Furman's tree. And for years and years, he lit it every year. And one year he didn't. He thought, well, it's enough. You know, his family was grown and whatnot. And we wrote a letter to the editor, and my sister did, and said, please light the tree again. And he did right on up till the time that he died. And it was just a time, see, not a lot of people had Christmas lights. We never thought of such of a thing. And, you know, to be able to have a light in a Christmas tree in your house was big enough, but not to have extra lights outside, for goodness sakes. And I saw over my time the evolution of what as people got more money, they were able to buy decorations. And I remember going around, driving around to see the lights that people had lit up their houses. And the Henderson family over here in the Loop, we call it, they had a Santa Claus. It looked like it was cut out of wood, the Santa Claus and the reindeer. And it was Christmas to get to drive over there and see that lit up. And we just had family come in. We had a big Christmas dinner, always. And it was just a time of joy. There's nothing like it. The Christmas spirit comes. And it comes down to our show. That's what the Hard Candy Christmas is about, is handmade crafts. You can reach in. I have a big old candy jar with wrapped peppermint, the hard candy, and then I go to the orchard, in the Barber Orchard, in September, and put back, usually it's about 4 to 5 bushel of the best apples. I don't get the culls, the seconds. They're the best apples. And then they put them in their chiller until the week of the show, and I go get them and put them in our big Christmas basket. So I want you to come and have apple and a piece of hard candy and enjoy some of the nicest handmade crafts in our area altogether. You would have to go through 70 different shows to find what I have gathered in one place. And it's truly been a gift. It's been a gift for the exhibitors. It's been a gift that I have been able to have income that I would not have had. And I am very grateful for the opportunity to be able to bring some of our Christmas traditions into this time, because they're vanishing. I don't want that to happen. This looks like a pile of cones, pods, general throwaway things that nobody does not want anymore. But actually, it's robins and wrens, hummingbirds and cardinals with the right touch on it. When I start designing my bird, I look at each cone and carefully scrutinize him, if you will, that they have all of the pieces in the cone. You want to have a perfect as possible pine cone. There are some parts of the cone that look like the breast more than others. And so you've got to really look and design. This would be a perfect hummingbird. It's nice and long and skinny. And so this cone will end up being a hummingbird. The owls are more chunky, and the quail is more chunky. So this looks like he might be a nice owl. I use the petal from the Norway spruce for the shorter varieties, the hummingbird, the owl, the woodpecker, and then the longer ones. This makes the wrens and robins. If enough were pulled together, and then glued back together, it would make a turkey fan. And I don't have a turkey to show you today, but I would take apart almost a cone this big to make a turkey. And his body is one of the ponderosa cones. There's larger ones and then there's smaller ones. The smaller ones are more compact and neat. And I don't think I have one to show you either, but that's the kind of cone that I use. To prepare my cone, I wrap a wire armature around the base of it. I usually spray paint each cone a base coat. That makes it easier to handle and easier to paint. If I'm going to make an owl, I will roll both of these wires down. But a bird that has a beak, I bring one out and roll one down. This acts as the armature for the head. Okay, we're going to pretend that I have this cone spray paint. You can see a little bit here. This is going to be a hummingbird. And his tail is one of the pieces. This is the Norway spruce cone. And this is also the tail for the owl and the woodpeckers. So you can see how that I'm starting out with the spray paint. Okay. For the ones who have wings, we're going to make a pair of feet. And the feet are important. The woodpeckers have 2 toes up and 2 toes back, all except the 3-toed woodpecker. And so here we're going to make a pair of feet. Also, while I'm thinking about the body, I want to try to find a nice piece of the cotton burr for the wing. There's a left side of the cotton bracket and a right side. And the center is the hummingbird wing. So the cotton bracket is all utilized. But right now we're going to work on a pair of feet. And I cut the floral wire. It has to be pretty thin, into 3 parts. Each part makes 1 pair of feet. So I need 2 wires to make a pair of feet. And they are attached onto the little body. Then the wings are glued in, cut, shaped, and glued in. And then the tail, here, this is probably a little bluebird. You can see the feet are on, the head is shaped, and this is the paper mache clay for the head. It starts out as a powder, and I mix it up with just a little bit of cold water. It is easy to get your clay material too soft. You don't want it too soft. But it can't be too stiff either. It's kind of like icing the cake. It's got to be just right. But here's the beginning of the head material. Okay, so we're going to make a pair of feet. The clay is pulled around the wires, the head wires, and then cut. I make the eye hole while the clay is soft. And I use the head of a man's shirt pin. When the little bird is all painted, his eye is the most exciting part of the whole bird. It's a dried up seed from the pokeweed plant. And if they're real dry, they will just crumble out. And they look just like a little beady, bright, shiny bird eye. It's amazing. So there's not any man-made thing on the whole little bird except the wire feet. When I made my first cardinal in 1973, it did look like a red pig with a yellow snout. Can you catch a picture of the little bird eye? This is the seed from the pokeberries. They are edible in the spring for poke salads, greens, and then in the fall they start maturing into big purplish juicy seed pods, and once the frost comes and they dry up, they're just perfect little eyes. And that some seeds are bigger than others. And you can just see, excuse me, the little wren is just ever so lovely. And he's just a pine cone.
Further away.
Want her to hold it?
Okay. The hummingbird is another amazing little bird. You can see the center of the cotton boll for its wings, and I try to bring on for the mobiles. Excuse me, and I'll get a piece of filament. Betty, I can't see my... Here we go. Sorry about that. I put the fishing line or the monofilament in at this point. I put it on the top, and then I build the bird around the fishing line, and it causes him to have perfect balance. This is the little female. She has the white, she's sort of a dull colored, and the male has the pretty bright red throat. Okay, and we're going to make a pair of feet as promised. Okay, one piece of each of the wires, or two pieces, are rolled half of the way down. It's me, Chester. I'm over here, honey. All right, here's the big half of the feet. And we want to turn it up. Okay, then another one Then the one that is all rolled gets cut in half and mashed together, squeeze it together. And you want to leave the loop for the toes. Okay, Betty, here we come. Okay, do this second one. Mash it and roll it. You've got to have really good, strong hands to do crafts. Okay. We've almost got a pair of feet. We want to cut in the middle. Okay. Now, if we're going to have woodpecker feet, we would pull out, this is woodpecker feet. They have 2 toes up and 2 toes back, all except the 3-toed woodpecker. Here we go. Then most birds have 3 toes up and 1 toe back. So there's one little foot. Then here's the second one. And you want them to have nice little sharp toenails. I used to get the shucks for all my flowers down in Margaret Ramsey's corn crib. I would get big bags of them and cut them on the top and the bottom, and bleach them, rinse them, air dry them. My living room would have piles of corn shucks, and then I would dye them, streak them with the bright colors, the greens for the leaves. I really enjoyed doing that. When I remember coming along, we had tissue flowers. Do you remember making Kleenex flowers? Oh, I thought it was so wonderful. And then we had crepe paper flowers. So I have always loved making flowers. And it was a good thing because I was going to make a few in my life, but I didn't know it. Okay, so now we're going to fold this over and then fold the other one over. Mash them together. They've got to try to be as even as possible. Okay, we roll them together now so we can see they're mashed together now. They've got to go up in the pine cone. So you got to just really squish them. Okay, see, it can stand on its own. Now, we're going to pretend like that we're going to put this on some little bird. I'll show you how it goes up in the body. And you've got to, if you pull the wire that attaches the feet on to one side, when you put on the wing, it will cover the place where the little wire rolls around, so it's not seen. I usually prefer a needle nose power. These are just regular old mechanic pliers. Okay, see, you have to bend the feet a little bit. Okay, now we're going to put the head wire on this one. If you want to see, okay, thank you. If you want to see some of my mobiles, they are at the Moses Cone Manor right off the Blue Ridge Parkway in Blowing Rock. And all the mobiles belong to me. You ought to be able to find the favorite birds of the South, hummingbirds, bluebirds, cardinals. That's the only place that I have my work. So now we're going to put on his head wire so we can sculpt his head. My daddy always talked about making a living on a rock. And I didn't really know what that meant, but he was always complimenting some of his neighbors or his friends that could make a living on a rock. That's taking the materials of what you have around you and, okay, see now we're beginning to get him. He's beginning to look like a little bird. He has a possibility. He's got something to shape his head on. That's the armature. Now, if we were going to do a woodpecker, we would put the two toes up and the two toes back. And then here is one of the pieces of this is usually a longleaf pine cone. And it's tricky business getting the scales out without breaking them. But if you've taken out about 900 or 1,000, you kind of have figured it out how to do it. And I use just regular old Elmer's glue. The wood glue has a greater ability to stick. Okay, now when he gets glued in, can I put him down or no? And then is the cotton bowls. For many years, I would go down in South Georgia right 1st of November, last of October, 1st of November, before the fields were plowed, and pick the cotton in the cotton fields. And hopefully you didn't get on somebody's wrong field, but I tried to make friends with several people down there, and I would just get a big sack full. And you want them, if they're too curled over, they're useless. See, that one is just not going to be any good to nobody. But you want them so that the pieces are nice and flat. And like I said, there's a left side and a right side. And they have got to match up on the bird, or one of the wings will be drooping. And there's a nice pair right there. See, they have enough room for you to paint. You want to be able to paint the little bars or make some changes in the wing, and then pull out the cotton. The school kids anymore cannot believe that cotton actually grows on a plant. I don't know what they know, but they don't know too much anymore, I can tell you. And all cotton pieces are not equal. I can tell you that. Some of them are just not going to work. Some of them are too flat, so I try to hew them down. There's a lot of matching that goes on into bringing a perfect bird into life. Here is a little cardinal that's ready to go on the favorite birds of the South Mobile. He's got his pinecone body and his little cotton bow wings, and he's got his pokeberry seed eyes, and he's just ready to fly away. But it's taken many hours to get him up to that point. Right here is the material for the head. It's a paper mache. We just want to barely moisten it. This takes time all in itself. Many people thought to copy. Over the years, they just knew they wanted to make pinecone birds. And then when they really got into it, they decided they were going to do something not so much work. Okay, it's slow process. Going to knead it just like you would your bread dough. The later paper mache, the kind you get now, is much superior to the first paper mache I used. Okay, here we go. If you don't thoroughly knead it, when it dries, there will be sinkholes in your bird's head, and you'll have to go back through and fill in sinkholes. It's got to have patient molding. That's kneading. Kneading is the word I'm reaching for. I have developed sensitivity in my hands over the period of time. Gosh, how many years since 1973? I'm not going to tell you. That I can pick up a piece of clay and I don't look at it. I can tell you within a pinch if it's too much or too little to go on a certain cone. I have very sensitive estimation, I guess you would call it, judgment about the clay. But that comes from just doing it a lot of years. Trial and error will do it to you too. One of my favorite things is the turkey. I build his head. I build his body with the bigger cones, like I said, and I just don't have one to show you. But there's a lot of work in him, but Mr. Turkey is what I call him, but he's very nice. Now here is little Mr. Bluebird. He's been painted. He's got his wires on his feet. He's going to be perched on somebody's little piece of driftwood. The driftwood is so good because it's natural, and every piece is just a little work of art. I used to get up in the middle of the night and go out with my flashlight and look at the wood I had found. Oh, it was so exciting. I really, really loved going, and I'm hoping that when I get over this new hip that I'll be rediscovering my goal. That's what I'm hoping. It shows the man skiing. I'm not going skiing tomorrow, Betty. Okay, now we're getting close to being ready to put it around the wire. We're going to pretend like that this fella has his wings on. He does not have his wings on, but this is how we begin to do it. We want to pull his head out and his beak all together. And there's his tail. It's not attached either, but when it's glued, it will be fine. And you just pull the clay around his head. You don't want to get it too wet, the head. You sure don't want to get the pine cone wet because it will shut up. It'll be as small as your little finger. Pine cones open and shut with humidity. There for a time, I was able to buy some cones from Mr. Charles Spears in Asheville, and he would put the cones while they were green in a heated tumbler, and the seeds would fall out, and he would use the cones and sell them to the wreath makers and the natural material people. And then he sold them to me for a good bit of time. See, we're beginning to be smooth. If you don't get it nice and smooth, it will be lumpy. And this new kind of paper mache clay dries better. It's just called celluclay, and it makes nicer heads than some of the original.
Why don't you just cut in kind of how you paint it now, and
Okay.
we'll chop it off here.
Okay. We're beginning to. And this is acrylic. I squeeze out my different colors. I've done this so long, I know what colors blend better, look better, and it's not really hard to do. It's just all a matter of being patient. And I try not to get the cone too wet because it will shut the cone up. It will shrink up. Then when it gets warm again and dry again, it will open back out. So this is, and the last thing to go in is the little eyes, which just brings the bird to life. And that, of course, is the pokeberry seed. I do something else that I wanted to show you. I make the eye hole while the head is soft. The beak will come out here in a little bit too. We haven't had the beak come out yet, but it will. And the little eyes are, I use a man's shirt pin that has the little knob on the end, and that makes the hole for the eye. It's very important that you put it in while it's wet. And then we have a little bird that's ready to fly. He just can't chirp, but he's very real looking, and he's just a pine cone in roundabouts. Okay. The mountains of the Blue Ridges have the largest stand of red spruce in the United States if the acid rain does not damage them. I wanted one in my yard so very much because the cones are where the little pinecone birds spring from. I borrowed a cutting from the Great Smoky Mountains Park as I was happening along and stuffed it down my blouse and brought it home. It was just a little bitty sprout out in the yard, but I kept it from being mowed down for a lot of years. And here it is. It's producing cones. It's where the hummingbirds, the robins, the wrens will eventually turn out to be mobiles that will be in people's houses. It is a wonderful tree.